I'm Ryan Frederick from AWH. We're a software product firm in town. You can talk to Bobby about what we do and who we are and more about all of that. This is Startup Grind, so we're going to have a conversation with Jill Raderstorf from the Ohio Innovation Fund. This is Jill. Welcome her.
Thanks for having me. Is this on?
It should be. You might have to... Here, you take this one because I know that one's working really well, and I'll figure this one out.
Thanks everyone for coming. It's great to see everybody.
Is this working? Yeah. Yes. Okay. Awesome. Apparently, you just have to hold it really close.
Okay.
Yeah. So where it's like almost touching your lips, which is now very uncomfortable for me. But you know, I was going to say something else. I'm going to leave that alone. What is the Ohio Innovation Fund? That sounds pretty fancy and pretty highfalutin. Is it as such, or is it somewhat less spectacular than it sounds?
Well, I think actually it's pretty spectacular. Ohio Innovation Fund, we're an early stage venture capital firm based here in Columbus, Ohio. We're focused on Series A and seed stage investments. And yeah, we've been operating since about 2016. And yeah, that's about it.
So why start it? Why spin it up? Why the need? Where was the void?
Yeah. So I think OIF has a really great founding story. The leadership at Ohio State and Ohio University actually dedicated funds to create Ohio Innovation Fund before Ohio Innovation Fund existed. So back in about 2012, both of the universities came together and recognized a need for really early stage funding in the state. So the state has done a great job of funding what we'd consider the entrepreneurial signature programs like Rev 1 to do some seed stage investing within the state. And they've been doing that for a number of years now and have created a pretty significant pipeline of companies that need further capital support. And they're really, back in 2012 and even today, there would be a great argument to be said that there's still not enough capital, both at the seed stage level, but also at the early stage level.
I think every entrepreneur here would probably vouch for that part of the statement.
Right. But if you look at Ohio, there's much more, when you think about the entire capital spectrum, there's a lot of capital being deployed at the seed stage levels, and there's less so at the Series A level. So that's kind of where we operate and where we come in. And in that space, we've co-invested with almost every venture firm in the state of Ohio. So I think we've done a pretty good job in the 3 years that we've been investing in putting that mission together.
Are you border locked by Ohio? Can you only fund Ohio companies?
Yeah, so that's a great question. For Fund 1, we are in Ohio for Ohio, so we only invest in Ohio-based technologies. I will say we have 13 portfolio companies, 12 are located in the state. We do have one that's based in California, but it has technology that's been licensed out of Ohio State University, and that's the Ohio Connection. That was our first investment. I don't think that we would be doing another out-of-state investment anytime soon, simply because we're really a both venture capital and expertise kind of model. So we like to sit on boards as board members or board observers so that we can really influence the strategy and the trajectory of the companies.
Did those guys move to California and then go all Hollywood, and that's why you can't invest in another company outside of Ohio?
No, not at all. It's just easier to be involved when you're close, right? It's a lot easier for me to get to a meeting that gets called on a Sunday night if I have to drive 2 hours to Cleveland or 2 hours to Cincinnati versus trying to hop on a flight to get to Silicon Valley or San Francisco, to get to where I need to be for that. But I will say, SpiroSure, that company, they just got FDA approval last week, so we're pretty excited about what they're doing.
Do you have to, since it was sort of the genesis was OU and OSU coming together, are you committed to funding things coming out of those universities and sort of commercialization or research out of them, or can you fund and engage with companies that have no affiliation to the universities whatsoever?
Yeah, that's a really great question and something we get asked a lot. We really respect and appreciate the relationship we have with our limited partners, which are all primarily universities. And because of that relationship, we sit on their accelerator committees so that we can get really close to the research that's being done at those institutions. But we are not limited to funding those companies. So again, we're limited in that we want to invest in only Ohio-based companies, but they do not have to be necessarily out of a university. So we're really open to any really high growth opportunity that we can find within the state. We've been lucky enough that we have developed some great relationships with our LPs and other universities. So our most recent investment, Data Anchor, is actually a spin out of Ohio State with the Technology Commercialization Office. So we're really excited about that. But that and SpiroSure are really the only two that are tied. I guess I say we have 3 portfolio companies that are tied to universities, those 2, and then Global Cooling, which is out of Ohio University. So.
And how many companies have you invested in so far? What's the portfolio look like beyond those 3?
Yeah, so to date we have 13 portfolio companies, hoping to close another one here in the next couple weeks or so. Of those 13 portfolio companies, we're pretty 50-50, I would say, med tech and then enterprise SaaS based, and I expect that kind of portfolio composition to continue as we continue to invest in the fund.
So are you focused in those 2 areas, or are those the 2 areas that by some investment thesis, right, or LP desire that you're investing in? Mm-hmm. Why those 2 in particular?
Yeah, so that's another great question. Really, again, our thesis, because we are in Ohio for Ohio, we're looking for really high growth, high potential opportunities. So we're generalists because of that. So being that we're constrained to investing in Ohio, you can't just invest in med tech in Ohio because there probably aren't enough opportunities to just focus strictly on med tech. Same with cybersecurity or any other industry that you'd be looking at. So we're looking for the best and the brightest and the highest potential, right? We're looking for big exits, things that can help put Columbus and the state of Ohio on the map.
So cryptos. Open for consideration then.
I'm not sure if I've been introduced to a few crypto companies. I'm not sure that we'll be investing in them, but I'll never say never.
Okay, fair enough. So how did you get into this gig? Is this a lifelong dream to be a partner at a venture fund, or is this some sort of weird serendipitous evolution?
Yeah, probably a little bit of both. If you look at my background, I have a very finance-heavy background. I've always been interested in investing and really value creation. And so, I started my career as a bank examiner with the FDIC on the risk management side. And in that role, I really learned...
A bank examiner?
Yeah.
What does that mean?
Yeah. Well, have you ever seen It's a Wonderful Life? And
actually,
the Christmas movie?
I haven't, because I don't watch anything that's good.
Okay, well, I'm sure. Has anyone seen It's a Wonderful Life?
Has anybody seen A Wonderful Life?
Yeah, so
okay, everyone
the bank
me.
gets shuttered, and there's the bank examiner that comes in. I was that bank examiner, which I know none of you know me very well, but I'm a pretty friendly person, and that was quite a hard challenge to walk in and be the person that nobody really wants to be there. I was that person. But anyway, so I started with the FDIC in 2008. Right at the beginning of the financial crisis, and it was really fascinating because I was working alongside my colleagues who had been examiners for 20 plus years, and we were all learning at the same time, so I got exposed to a lot of really interesting things.
What's the worst thing that you saw?
Worst thing that I saw, well, really, really bad loan portfolios, lots of loan losses, and then one of the biggest kind of takeaways and life-changing events that happened was when I was working in their resolutions and receiverships division. So that's the division of the FDIC that takes over a failed bank when the state pulls their charter. And I was doing depositor phone calls in 2008 when the first bank failed. And I spoke with a woman on the phone who had pulled her life savings from the stock market and put it in this bank, when at the time, insurance was only $100,000, and she had $750,000 in this institution. And so I had to walk through the analysis of what she had left after that bank failed. And I just remember, again, this woman was probably in her mid-70s, and she was so grateful for our conversation. And I really have always taken that away. That I really believe in the mission that the FDIC serves, and she was so grateful that she had someone to talk to. And luckily, she got about, I want to say 80% of her money back, but still,
that's awesome.
She thought she lost everything, and I was just glad I was able to help her that day.
Yeah. So how did that prepare you for getting
Yeah.
into this, venture game?
Yeah, so long story short, right?
No, you can look. They don't want to hear me ask questions. They want to hear about your experience and background. So
Yeah.
you can ramble as long as you want. I've got coffee and water. I'm good.
So the FDIC, I was there for about 6.5 years. I'd say the two biggest things that really affect my day-to-day at OIF as a partner there. One, I learned a ton about analysis, right? I looked at loan portfolios all day long, so I was grading loans, and that is very similar to what you have to do when you're looking at a pitch, because you have to make decisions pretty quickly, right? We only invest in 5 to 10% of the companies that we look at on an annual basis, and so you have to be able to make decisions and kind of shrink your pipeline pretty quickly. And when I had a day or two to make a decision on a $25 million plus loan. It's kind of a similar type of experience. And then the other really big takeaway from that work as an examiner was communication. From the age of 22 on, I was working with C-suite executives and board members. And again, during the crisis, we were having really challenging conversations. And those conversations really helped me develop the skills that I think you need to be working with entrepreneurs and founders when you're negotiating term sheets, or you're working through a challenging time when the company has to pivot and you have to make some tough decisions. And those are not easy conversations, and those are conversations where you really need to be able to do them well so that you protect the relationship, and so that the person across the table from you can hear what you're saying and not take any negativity towards that.
Did you say 22?
Yeah.
Okay. Moving on. At 22, I was still trying to figure out how to put pants on correctly. So you were a little bit ahead of me. So as you guys, you invest in 5 to 10% of the companies that you look at. How many companies are you typically looking at on an annual basis?
Yes, so I look at probably 50 to 60 deals a year, and at some varying degree. But that's pretty reflective of, again, that 5 to 10%. We do about 4, maybe 5 deals a year.
And where are you typically getting those 50 to 60 companies from? Where's your, as it's sort of coined in the industry, where's your deal flow coming from?
Yeah, we have a couple of different sources of deal flow. One being our investor network, right? So Rev1, great partners here, and the other ESPs through the state, like Jumpstart and Cincy Tech, those are there. We do a deal flow call actually with a group called Next Gen, which is a lot of investors who are earlier in their career. We hop on the phone once a month, and I'm pretty proud to say we started that actually, again, born out of Rev1. I'm looking back at Bethany George, born out of Rev1 about a year ago, and it started out with just a few investors here in the state, and we've grown that list to about 60 investment funds in the Midwest. So we're looking at deal flow not only in Ohio, but throughout the Midwest. And so that's been a really great source of deals for us. We also, still spend a lot of our time doing, meeting entrepreneurs who are cold emailing us or cold calling us. And then outreach events like tonight. I try to do a couple of what I would call entrepreneurial focused events a month, just so that people get to know who we are as OIF. I'm still answering questions about who we are, who do we fund, what our check sizes are. So as much as we can get that information out and into the hands of the people who need it, that's what we're trying to do.
Yeah, I was actually remiss in not thanking Rev1 for letting us come in here and do this. And Bethany's been terrific over the years. When I first started doing this and nobody gave a shit that it was happening, Bethany would come and she would send me a message and she would be like, I'll be there tonight to support you. And she would be like one of 8 people. So she's been awesome. She actually went and did a startup run. We were just talking about this earlier, in the country of Georgia. And 200 people showed up to hear her talk.
It's pretty awesome.
Yeah. So she's been terrific, and Rev1's been terrific as part of supporting this over the last 6 years. So you mentioned a couple things that we need to touch on. What typical investment size and check do you write, and sort of how do you determine for that 5 to 10%? What's the difference that separates them from the 50 to 60? right? Why are you writing checks and investing in those companies and not the ones that you said no to?
Yeah, so first question, what kind of check size do we write? We really try to meet the needs of the round, but we have written checks anywhere from a few $100,000 up to a few $1 million as an initial check, and then we reserve an equivalent or larger amount for follow-on funding to support the company through their life cycle. And then why do we choose our investments is a great question. We're looking again, I keep harping on this because I think it's so important, really high growth, high opportunity investments. So companies that we think they have a compelling value proposition, right? That they are doing something that's different from the competition that's out there, because everybody has competition, whether or not you like to admit it. And something that I think really that the Midwest does well are creating capital efficient companies. So we love to see a company that is doing a few $1 million in business that's only raised an equivalent amount of capital, right? That's really impressive. And I like to joke that when you have a budget, you have to get scrappy and you have to figure out how to do things, because when you have an unlimited budget, it's easy to blow through that money very quickly. So the companies that we're looking for, compelling business idea, really game-changing technology. A great example of this would be Data Anchor, one of our most recent investments. They're in the cybersecurity market, and they are focused on what they're calling, they're changing the paradigm shift in the cybersecurity space, data loss mitigation versus data loss prevention. So they're not building a wall, they're following the data, and they're creating almost a spider web effect around the data where they can catch that data as it's being pulled out of an organization. So that's a game-changing way to think about that industry, and that's what was a compelling reason for us to invest in Data Anchor. Another company that we invested in last year is called RxQ Compounding. So it's a 503B compounding facility, a pharmacy out of Albany, Ohio, actually. And we met the founder, Ed Zada, and he's just a very dynamic individual who's been a pharmacist his whole career. The 503B designation is a new thing in the industry, happened about 4 or 5 years ago.
Yeah, I was going to ask you what that was.
Yeah, so 503B allows a compounding facility to compound medications that are on the FDA shortlist without a prescription. So most 503A compounding pharmacies, you must have a prescription for this medicine for them to compound it for you, whereas the 503B facilities are really focused on supplying pharmacies, hospitals, clinics, et cetera, where they can have these things in their pharmacies and back offices to hand out to patients as needed. And Ed is growing a business that has done, I think over 200% revenue growth year over year for the last 3 years, and we expect that trajectory to continue. And he's just an established operator, right? So he's been operating independent pharmacies for 25 years or more, and he knows a lot of people. So he's a great employer. People want to work for him, and so he's able to attract amazing talent. And because of that, they're moving out of their facility that's actually housed in Ohio University's campus. They're building a huge warehouse in Albany, Ohio, which is in one of the poorest communities in the state, and they're going to employ hundreds of people there to do what we think are good paying jobs. And we think that we'll build this warehouse, and manufacturing facility. We'll build another one, somewhere else sometime soon. So that's exciting, and seeing those kind of really high growth opportunities is really, really interesting for us.
Yeah, that's awesome. And is his name Ed?
Yes.
How did you meet Ed? How did this come to be where you ended up in a conversation and then ultimately investing in Ed in the pharmacy business?
Yeah, so I talk about how we do a lot of outreach at OIF. We were actually just down at Ohio University on their Innovation Center doing a tour, and we happened to run across another investor that we're in a couple deals with, and he said, I'm looking at this company, you guys should take a look. And so we did, and we had lunch with Ed and another strategic advisor of his and strategic investor, and we started looking at the deal and understood the opportunity and decided to invest. And it's been a really exciting ride. I think we invested in June of last year, and again, it's been pretty amazing to see him build out his team. We just added a COO, we're adding a chief revenue officer this year, and it's been fun to build that out with him.
And the way you just described that, in the inclusive we, So you're not silent money. It doesn't sound like. It sounds like you sort of dig in with the founders, with the operators, and figure out what is the strategy, and then to some degree help advise and support the execution.
Yes, most definitely. And when we look at our portfolio, we really get excited about the companies that we can get engaged the most in. So RxQ is a great example. Another one locally that people might be familiar with is Wiretap. We are the co-leads of their Series A, and we attend monthly board meetings, and up until the end of the year, I was attending sales meetings on a weekly or biweekly basis. So we get deeply involved, and we try to be helpful where we can be, right? We invest in CEOs and founders because we believe they're the experts in their field, but that certainly doesn't mean that they don't need help as they're building and scaling their businesses, and that's kind of where we step in. Another thing that we really are excited to help our companies with are their product roadmaps, right? If they don't have a product manager in place, helping them try and identify what opportunities they have and what strategy challenges they might face as they grow. That's something that we get involved in. And then we've been really successful in helping our companies raise the Series Bs. Again, I won't take any of the credit. Our CEOs and founders do all of the work, but we try to help them build their decks and perfect their pitches and really help them understand and crystallize their message so that investors can hear what they're doing and actually understand it.
Those Wiretap guys, they need all of your help and support. They're pretty incompetent.
I don't think so.
No, not at all. Great team.
Yeah.
What's the team at OIF look like? How big are you guys, and how do you handle all of what you have going on in terms of looking at new deals and opportunities, and then supporting the companies that you're already in?
Yeah, so we really pride ourselves in efficiency at OIF. We are.
So that means you're small.
That would be the kind way of saying that. Yeah, no, we're really we do a great job. Bill Baumel is our managing director, and then it's myself, and then we have a team that supports us on the marketing side, and we also have an investment analyst that helps us. And then we really strengthen ourselves through our strategic advisors as well as our technical experts that we bring in to handle things. But yes, we have a lot of things going on all the time, and Bill and I both agree that we operate best when we are at our busiest, which happens to be all the time. So we really thrive in that environment.
And I'm going to circle back to you getting into the gig. So
Yeah.
How did the opportunity present itself? Why did you say yes?
Yeah, so
You were giving banks a spanking.
Yeah.
That seemed like you enjoyed that, and then this comes along and lures you away.
Right. So the one thing I didn't tell you earlier about being a bank examiner is that you travel about 80% of the time, and it's not to the most glamorous of places. So after 6.5 years, I was very tired of living out of Holiday Inns and Hyatts and things like that. So I started looking for a different opportunity. I ended up making the transition into the private sector and working at JP Morgan as an underwriter in their private bank. And I managed a hedge fund portfolio. It was actually a consumer loan portfolio of hedge fund owners. And so I was doing a lot of deals with hedge fund principals, learned a little bit more about fund dynamics. And while I was at JP Morgan, I went into the Working Professionals program at Ohio State to get my MBA at night. And in that space, through my MBA, I got to learn a little bit more about venture capital. And I kind of always thought I would go into private equity. Didn't really know what that meant. Venture capital, some could argue, is private equity in a very small aspect, but they're very different. And I took an entrepreneurial finance class, and it was all about angel investing and a little bit about venture capital. And so I really kind of was intrigued by the valuation process because I'm a numbers person, right? I like to dig into spreadsheets and build out projections. And so I was interested in how people do valuations. And I got the opportunity to work at OIF through the MBA program. They actually offered a summer opportunity, and I threw my name in the hat to work for OIF, which at the time we didn't even have a website. So I was Googling, and I couldn't.
That's always appealing.
Yeah, so I had no idea. I had just like a couple Business First articles that described Bill coming in and the LPs that had raised this money. And I remember going into my interview, like asking questions because there's actually an OIF Ohio Innovation Fund that is now defunct, that is in the Cleveland area, so I didn't even know where we were located. But anyway, he offered me the spot, and I jumped at the opportunity because venture capital positions are very few and far between, and the chance to learn from somebody who has such a great background and experience was really exciting for me. So I came to OIF as a summer intern, actually, and 3 weeks into the position, Bill offered me a permanent role, and I said yes. So it's been a really interesting ride. I started as an analyst and started kind of with the due diligence process, and Bill told me I was really good at ripping through a deal. So that was a good compliment, and I didn't really, again, understand what I was doing, but apparently I was doing something right. And so he offered me the role, and I started as an analyst, and last year I was promoted to a partner role, and I think that was really just kind of a natural next step. Bill's a really strategic guy, so I would like to say that he was looking for somebody that maybe had that opportunity or had the capacity to take on a role like that. But I was just really lucky that I feel like I've learned a lot, and I've grown a lot in the last couple of years, and I'm really excited to be deeply involved in all of the decision making that we do at OIF, from how we help our portfolio companies to what companies we're bringing on in our portfolio and all of those things.
So for the entrepreneurs in the room, what can they do to position themselves well and to communicate effectively with you guys about getting funding so they can be part of that 5 to 10% and not part of the larger group that's getting denied?
Yeah. I always encourage anybody who has an idea or is focused on building their business to start early and start often. So even if you're not in a position where I could be an investor in your company, I'd like to know what you're doing, because the longer I have to monitor your progress and see how you operate as a CEO and founder, the more information I have to make a decision later on. So I think it's always, I'm always very open to spending my time meeting with founders. The other thing that I think founders often do a really good job of, but I always, again, recommend it, is being open to ideas, right? So a lot of times I'll meet with founders, and I try to add value in every conversation, who have questions, and ask those questions, because it's always good to get that information early on, whether you need it right now or you need to tuck it away for later. A great example of this, I met with a gentleman last week who is working on an idea, and he's really excited about it, but he's not sure how he's going to price it. And I certainly don't know how he should price it, but I can give him some ideas of what I've seen that's worked well and things that haven't worked well, to give him some fodder to think about and consider as he's building out his model, and hopefully that's helpful.
How does someone start a conversation with you? Besides walking up to you after we're done talking, tomorrow, 3 months from now, how does someone start a conversation with you in a serious, way? If they email you, do those emails go anywhere, or does it go into a black hole? Lots of investors say, yes, we have funded, cold email companies before, but in reality, it's one out of, 200 investments that they've made.
Right.
So is that really a legit path for founders, or do they need to be introduced and sort of networked in?
Yeah, I mean, obviously a warm intro is going to be the best approach, right, if you have that opportunity. But I do my best to keep up with my emails. I can't promise that I'm 100% perfect at it. But yeah, so you can email us. You can email me. I'm happy to give you my information after this talk. We do have like an info at Ohio Innovation Fund email, ohioinnovationfund.com.
So there's the black hole.
That is kind of a black hole, but we do look at it on a weekly basis. So, and we try to respond. Again, I try to respond to everything that's legitimate. But I've also been, connected with people on LinkedIn, and I've, again, taken meetings from people who have messaged me on LinkedIn. So I don't think it's the wrong approach if that's what you're looking for. Ohio is a small, or in Columbus at least, we have a pretty small community. It's getting bigger by the day, but people are still really open and willing to be helpful. So there's chances are, if you're here tonight, or if you're listening to this or watching this at some later point, somebody in the community that might be able to connect you with myself or someone that's close to me, right?
And that reminds me, I need to do a shout out to Ryan Lunka from N Channel, because he's the one person that I've talked to that said, because he can't make it on Monday nights because of some other commitment. I don't know, it sounded like bullshit. But he was like, I watch and listen to all of them.
It's pretty cool.
Right. So
it's pretty cool that you at least have one really great fan, right?
Exactly, right. His name also happens to be Ryan. So, I mean, I had an infatuation with him already. But yes, there's one person that cares about the fact that we're recording this, apparently. I thought it was 0, so that made me feel good.
There you go.
What's your decision process if you get to the point of you're talking to a company about funding and you're in a serious conversation where you're considering funding them? Do you get to just decide? Does Bill get to decide? Do you guys decide together? Do you seek other opinions? How do you ultimately decide whether you're going to make the investment or not?
Yeah, so I run our due diligence. I start it. So you start directly with myself. Things that we're looking for, again, are really game-changing technologies, large market sizes, right? We want big exits, so we're looking for large markets to make that happen.
What's a big exit? And what's a big market? Because there's lots of sort of confusion, and I see a lot of founders, right, doing the pitch deck of, well, if I only get 1% of a $4 billion market, I'm okay. It's like, okay, but that seems like made up, bullshit. So,
right.
What's a legit big market and a legit big exit for you guys?
Yeah, so, in a perfect world, right, we're looking for $100 million plus exits here in the state because we want to help put Ohio on the map for technology innovation. Market size, we would love to see $1 billion plus market size, but as you mentioned, you can have an $8 billion market and you can tell me, I can only get 1%, and we joke about this a lot as investors. How do you get the 1%? And if you're 1%, are you even relevant in your market? Because ultimately you need to IPO or be acquired, so that has to be a part of your strategy. And in order to attract attention from a potential acquirer, you better own 10 to 15% of your market, right? You have to cause some annoyance or some scratch, right, with the competitors for them to see what you're doing. So that's really important too. So being realistic in how you're going to achieve your market, but also finding a market that's big enough to be investable is really important. Another thing that we're looking for, again, we want to look at how much money have you raised, because we're investing at early stages, so we can't invest in overvalued companies. We just don't have the interest or the capital to do that, right? So those types of things. And then in general, again, compelling, right? I'm not going to dig in more or research more unless I'm really intrigued by what you're doing. So really big ideas, that's what we're looking for.
How comfortable are you, because companies at the early stage are clearly still iterating, they're still to a great degree trying to find product customer fit. How comfortable are you with pivots and iterations through the cycle, or are you looking for companies that have already mostly sort of gone through that and have reached a maturation, almost sort of scale-up point?
Yeah, so a really smart person once told me that he looks for people who are willing to be flexible, because there's always going to be a pivot and your problem is always going to change. Right? You remember that?
I remember that conversation. I'm not sure I would categorize him as smart. He says, he has an epiphany once in a while.
Yeah, so we're comfortable with pivots, right? That's expected in our world. We like to invest in companies that have proven their product market fit. They have a few customers that are paying them for what they're doing today, right? They have that fit in place, but just because they have that doesn't mean they're going to pivot. Great example would be Wiretap, right? So they focused on Yammer at the beginning, and then Microsoft started to kind of slow their investments in Yammer, and now they've got this amazing relationship with Workplace by Facebook. So that's technically a pivot, right? Because their focus changed. They're still in the collaboration space, but they had to move quickly to make that happen. So we expect pivots, we expect change. We're looking for coachable, flexible CEOs that can manage that, because it does change. But again, looking for companies that have identified their product market fit. They have a few customers, because for us as investors as well, that's very helpful, right? If you have a customer, you have a reference. I can call your customer and they can tell me why they've bought your product and why they choose to pay you for what you're doing. And that's really, really helpful to an investor, especially someone like myself who's a generalist, because I can't be an expert at every space. So I need to rely on industry expertise to help me vet an investment.
So I've been through this, starting companies, and most founders have been through this, and I hear this a lot from founders, that when they go out and they seek funding, the terms and the valuations, it becomes an awkward part of the conversation, because they often feel like they're either not getting the valuation they think that they should, or the terms then aren't sort of in alignment with the valuation, and investors want too much equity for the amount of money that they're putting into the company. What do you say around that whole sort of valuation terms, how much equity is being given up for the amount of investment?
Yeah, I think that's always going to be a conundrum, right? We sit on different sides of the table, but ultimately the goal is to create a partnership. So if you're in a situation where you're getting uncomfortable, the best policy is to be open and honest and communicate, right? I can't improve your situation if you don't tell me that you're upset by it. So that's number one, right? Communicate that there is a challenge here, that you're frustrated, and understand that all our interests, again, may not be aligned through the negotiation process, but ultimately we're all hoping for a partnership, and you can't have a strong partnership if you muddle it up in the negotiation piece. So open and honest communication. Valuations, I think entrepreneurs are much more focused on valuation than the investor is. The valuation has to be reasonable, and we have to make everything make sense, but I think entrepreneurs specifically get really hung up on the valuation. And ultimately, again, kind of bank examiner coming out, people will only pay you for your company what they're willing to pay you. So the valuation until you sell is just a number.
But it drives so many other things.
It does.
And I think that's where the rub is. And so, especially first-time founders who've never even gotten a term sheet before, right? It's very unfamiliar territory, and they're afraid they're going to make a mistake. They're afraid they're going to give up too much for the amount of funding that they're getting, and then and we've all heard the stories about and Aaron Levy spoke at the Startup Grind Global Conference in Silicon Valley last week, and it was sort of famous that when Box went public, they found out. It was revealed that he owned less than 1% of the company. And he sort of talked about that a little bit, and he was like, we needed more cash to keep growing the company. We need more cash to keep growing the company. We need more cash to, something had to give, right? And so our equity had to keep giving so that we could raise more money, because we never would have gotten to where we've gotten to if we didn't. And so as an entrepreneur, you also have, you have to make professional adult decisions about, do I want to capitalize on this opportunity and give up equity, or do I want to hold on to it and maybe not manifest what's possible? I don't know that there was a question there. I just started rambling.
I think it's hard. One, I think if you're an entrepreneur, I think in the Midwest we're pretty good, at least for us. I can speak to OIF. We try to make sure that our founders have adequate position on the cap table, because we respect what you're doing. Again, we're creating a partnership, and we know what you're going to be doing is really, really hard, and you need to be compensated for that, and you need to have that carrot on the stick, right? And if that carrot's not there, then it's harder to put in the time and effort it takes to build a company. So I think that we try to be very reasonable about that. But yes, as you say, Ryan, I mean, when you're building a company, you do have to make those decisions, and it's hard. And I like to think that we grow the pie, right? So your position might change, your ownership might shrink, but hopefully that pie is getting larger. And so even if your ownership is shrinking, the opportunity on the exit side is getting bigger.
So I'm going to ask a few more questions, and then we'll throw it out. Bobby has a mic over here, and Brian has a mic over there. Raise your hand, and they'll get you a mic. As you think about supporting the companies and them going through the process, and you talked about reserving funding for future rounds. When do those conversations typically come up? Do they have to, and how do they come up? Do they have to hit specific milestones? And if they accomplish X, Y, and Z, then another round will sort of automatically sort of kick in? Or is it sort of a renegotiation, and then they also have to go out and seek funding from other people to sort of join that next round? How do you sort of work with your companies about the next round of funding? after they've presumably matured as a company a little bit?
Yeah, again, we try to meet the needs of the company, right? So we're a Series A investor, early stage investor. So generally, our companies are raising a growth round.
When you say Series A,
yeah.
How many entrepreneurs in this room think that based upon what they know of a Series A round, that's early stage? Okay. How many people think that's not early stage? Yeah. So I think that we in Silicon Valley, they would probably still see Series A as early stage. I think in Ohio, most entrepreneurs don't see Series A as early stage,
right?
Because we still have lots of work to do to get lots of companies to the Series A stage.
Right.
Sorry for interrupting.
No, it's fair.
My gut is that most entrepreneurs here don't look at Series A as an early stage round. They actually look at it as sort of a late stage round.
Right. No, that's fair. There's a lot of de-risking that happens between Series Seed or angel investment and Series A. But so Series A round, that's typically where we invest. And so when you're raising your Series B, oftentimes that's going to be a sizable round, right? So we would like to participate in those rounds. Sometimes we will lead those rounds, but oftentimes those rounds are going to be too big for us to be the lead investor. So you would have to go out as a founder to bring in a strategic or a lead for that round, and we would participate in it. And that's generally what has happened for us in our portfolio companies. We had 5 companies raise a Series B round successfully last year, and we participated in every one of those rounds. But to your question, how does that happen? Generally, you're waiting to raise a round as a company until you hit an inflection point, right? You want to grow your business to the point where you can get a better valuation or a higher valuation than you did in your previous round. If you don't, you have to take a down round. Those terms change, right? Those investor terms are going to be different. So most of our companies, when they're raising a round, it's because they've started to gain traction, somebody has shown interest, a strategic investor has shown interest, right? There's a trigger that happens, or their revenue hits a certain point, right? A lot of companies, a lot of venture funds on the West and East Coast want to see $5 million in ARR to be an investor. So those are some kind of trigger points. Also, sometimes your companies will raise a bridge round, and in that situation, again, that's a negotiated kind of decision between your investment team, your internal investors. Can you raise a bridge round that's insiders only that can help you get to that next inflection point? Oftentimes, that's a different conversation than let's go out and raise our Series B with an external lead.
How much do you, because this is the last question I'll ask. When we met leading up to this, we also talked about accelerators and incubators. How much do you care, or do you put any value in whether a founder or a founding team has gone through an accelerator, and is that of value? Does that give them some level of credibility or increased value and consideration over another, or does it not matter to you guys at all?
It doesn't affect us at all whether or not you've been through an accelerator or not. I will say I think accelerators can provide value if you approach it with the right idea in mind of what you want to get out of that program. And oftentimes accelerators can give you a lot of visibility that you won't get if you avoid it or just choose not to participate. But it's not material to our decision whether or not you've been through an accelerator or not.
Okay, cool. If you have a question, raise your hand, and depending on where you are, Bobby or Brian will get you a microphone.
So there's a lot of companies that you say no to. What's the biggest reason or biggest reasons that you typically say no?
Yeah, so a lot of times market size is a challenge, or their focus, right? We don't really invest in consumer-based companies or consumer-facing companies. We like to do the B2B, so that's a kind of a big one that kind of gets you out of our pipeline quickly. Another might just be that the value prop hasn't been fully explained to us, right? So this is a hard part for entrepreneurs, is being able to pitch what you do, because again, if you can't do it in a way that's compelling and quick, right? We all hear it, right? The elevator speech of you need to be able to explain your business in one sentence or less. Sometimes you just can't get the value prop across quickly enough. those are probably some of the biggest reasons.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So how would you instruct entrepreneurs to come to you with a better sort of elevator pitch and pitch deck? What are they, when they're not hitting the mark, why are they missing it?
Yeah, probably because they haven't practiced enough and with enough variety of people, right? Everyone hears things differently, and you have to practice, right? Like that age-old adage, you just have to do that. And you have to recognize that maybe your pitch doesn't land the first time you do it, but you can probably, especially again in our community, you can email someone again and ask them for another meeting, and oftentimes you will be successful because perseverance is part of the game.
Sorry, I do have another question
Yeah.
now, piggybacking on that one. Are companies and founders mostly one and done with you guys? If they come and pitch you, and it's a no, can they come back and pitch again, and in what reasonable amount of time, or do you mostly move on and just look for new ideas and new people?
Yeah, so a little bit of both, but I will say I haven't taken anyone out of my pipeline because if you come to me, another answer to your question that I failed to answer was stage, right? If you're too early for us, we can't invest and we just won't because of certain reasons, right? And oftentimes, but I would, again, like to know what people are doing as early as possible. So just because I said no once you came to me for your seed round, I said no, I hope that you come and approach me to your A round, and I hope that you add me to your monthly or quarterly newsletter so that I can keep tabs on what's going on.
Yeah.
Yeah, there are two questions for me. The first one is, can you share with you guys about the most struggling case you ever had before? And the second one is that for your investment psychology, are you more focused on the founders or CEOs background, or more focused on the potential value of this program? Because in Silicon Valley, for my experience, that my internal company more focused on the background of the CEO and the COO and the chief compliance officer, and most of them are from Stanford. If not, and our GP will refuse that. So can you share something about them?
Yeah, so we put a lot of weight onto the founding team. Obviously, oftentimes, even though Series A may be later stage, there's still a lot of risk and there's still a lot of challenges with making sure your projections happen as you anticipate. So we're looking for a founding team. Obviously, credentials or industry expertise that can be gleaned from your background would be really attractive, but I think you can also support that with a strong product and a strong product market fit. So if you have clients and customers that are leaders in their industry that are, again, paying you for your product, that also speaks volume to what you've built and can support, a strong team or a strong product. Both of those are really attractive to us. And I apologize, I can't remember your first question, so you can repeat it.
It's about the most struggling case you have ever had before.
Like a struggling case?
Yeah, or maybe you are hesitating for a long period about this.
Yeah, I won't name the company for confidentiality purposes, but I did have a founder pitch me an idea that they were also personally invested in, and in the same hour conversation, that person said they were not willing to put any more money into their company at that point in time, but he was asking me to put money into his company. So I think that would be a big no. Don't do that if you ever get into that situation.
That seems like reasonably good advice. Hey, this is going to be an unfair question.
Can you talk about when valuation for a founder, maybe getting a high valuation may actually be a problem based on their market cap, and why venture capitalists will look at that and decide potentially not to invest?
Yeah, so on the valuations, well, one, you have to think about who you're pitching to, right? So first question you should ask as an entrepreneur is, what size checks do you write, right? Because if you're raising a $10 million round and I'm only going to give you $100,000, I'm clearly not going to be your lead investor. On the valuation side, again, people who invest in seed investments, their valuations tend to be less than $10 million, right? Because again, we can't overpay for an investment at the beginning, especially such a risky investment as a startup. There are certain valuation points, and again, it differs for every fund, but every fund and every stage, but if your valuation is too high, you eliminate your opportunity pool, right? And so you have to think about that, and you have to think about the size of check you're asking for and your valuation, because those two align as well, right? If you're raising, again, $1 million on a $20 million valuation, there are going to be a lot of people that are going to be able to invest in that. I had a company approach me, and they have a couple of things they need to work through, and this is a good point of getting to somebody early. They're going to raise a $6 to $7 million round. They're calling it a Series B round, and they had a $125 million valuation. And I said, well, you've immediately kind of lost your opportunity, because at $125 million, that person that's going to lead that round needs to cut a check of a sizable amount. It's probably more than your entire round that you're requesting, right? For them to get their 10x return, which is ultimately the answer to your question. We're looking for 10x returns, right? Because 10x has to be possible. It's probably not probable, but I need to be able to kind of see a path to that in order to take that risk and hope that we land somewhere in the middle, or 10x or somewhere in the middle. But so yeah, you have to think about kind of the mechanics of your raise and who the prospects are for that, right? Because you are prospecting as an entrepreneur. You're looking to create your pipeline of potential investors, and you're going to whittle that down to the 5 or 10 prospects that hopefully will lead your round.
So you mentioned something earlier, and this came up a couple weeks ago in a conversation. How do you define a down round?
Yeah, so a down round would be at a lower valuation or a lower price per share than what you raised previously, and those can be challenging conversations that luckily I haven't had to participate in at this point, so I can't speak too much about it, but I know that that's a challenging conversation for everyone around the table.
Is that a death sentence for a company if they have to do a down round?
I don't think so. I think down rounds can signify a lot of things like pivots, et cetera. So I would not say that it's a death sentence, but it's certainly something you want to avoid if at all possible.
And you've talked a lot about product market fit, product customer fit. So clearly you guys are focused, and I'm a product guy, so product is near and dear to my heart. You're clearly focused a lot on product and how well the founding team or the team that they have in place, how good they are at product. True?
Yes, very true. And we talk about this a lot, that product manager role is something that it's really hard to find an amazing product manager, and if you find them, hold on to them as much as you can. But yeah, we're really focused on that. Again, I have a company that I've been looking at for potential investment, and when you call their customers and the references are, these are the most amazing people that I work with, and I love their product, and there is not a single thing I would change about it, that speaks volumes and is worth more than all of the hours you spend on your pitch deck, because you have somebody who tells me there is nothing, they use your product every day, and there is absolutely nothing that they would change about it. That's a pretty impressive compliment.
Please help me thank Jill for joining us tonight.
Thank you for having me.